Answer. This line of reasoning proves too much. It inevitably leads to the conclusion that any form of popular government ought to be based on the existence of strictly universal suffrage. An extreme suffragette will say that this result is not a reductio ad absurdum. But there are thousands of sensible English men and English women who, while they doubt the advisability of introducing into England even manhood suffrage, refuse to admit the cogency of reasoning which leads to the result that every Englishman and Englishwoman of full age must have a right to vote for a Member of Parliament. But the full strength of an anti-suffragist's reply cannot be shown by any man who does not go a little further into the nature of things. A fair-minded man prepared to do this will, in the first place, admit that many democratic formulas, e.g. the dictum that liability to taxation involves the right to representation, do verbally cover a woman's claim to a parliamentary vote. His true answer is that many so-called democratic principles, as also many so-called conservative principles, are in reality not principles at all, but war cries, or shibboleths which may contain a good deal of temporary or relative truth, but are mixed up with a vast amount of error. The idea, he will ultimately say, that the possession of a vote is a personal right is a delusion. It is in truth the obligation to discharge a public duty, and whether this miscalled right should be conferred upon or withheld from Englishwomen can be decided only by determining whether their possession of the parliamentary vote will conduce to the welfare of England. Second argument. The difference of sex presents no apparent or necessary reason for denying to Englishwomen the same political rights as are conferred upon Englishmen. It is found by experience, as suffragists will add, that some women have in many ways even greater capacity for the exercise of government than have some men. This argument may best be put in its full strength if it be placed, as it often is, in the form of a question: was it reasonable that Florence Nightingale should not have possessed the right to vote for a Member of Parliament when even in her day her footman or her coachman, if he had happened to be a £10 householder or a 40-shilling freeholder, might have exercised a right denied to a lady who, as appears from her biography, possessed many statesmanlike qualities, who did in fact in some lines of action exert more political power than most MPs, and who always exercised power disinterestedly and generally exercised it with admitted benefit to the country? There is not the remotest doubt that the argument involved in this inquiry, in whatever form it is stated, seems to many women, to a great number of parliamentary electors, and also to a considerable number of MPs, to afford an unanswerable and conclusive reason in favour of giving parliamentary votes to women. Answer. The claim of parliamentary votes for women, as now put forward in England, is in reality a claim for the absolute political equality of the two sexes. Whether its advocates are conscious of the fact or not, it is a demand on behalf of women for seats in Parliament and in the Cabinet. It means that Englishwomen should share the jury box and should sit on the judicial bench. It treats as insignificant for most purposes that difference of sex which, after all, disguise the matter as you will, is one of the most fundamental and far-reaching differences which can distinguish one body of human beings from another. It is idle to repeat again and again reasoning which, for the last 30 years and more, has been pressed upon the attention of every English reader and elector. One thing is certain. The real strength, and it is great, of the whole Conservative argument against the demand of votes for women lies in the fact that this line of reasoning, on the face thereof, conforms to the nature of things. The anti-suffragists can re-echo the words of Burke whilst adapting them to a controversy unknown to him and practically unknown to his age. Quote, "The principles that guide us, in public and in private, as they are not of our devising, but moulded into the nature and the essence of things, will endure with the sun and moon, long, very long after Whig and Tory, Stuart and Brunswick, suffragist, suffragette, and anti-suffragist, and all such miserable bubbles and playthings of the hour are vanished from existence and from memory." End quote. Proportional representation. The case in favour of the introduction of proportional representation into England rests on the truth of three propositions. First proposition. The House of Commons often fails to represent with precision or accuracy the state of opinion, e.g. as to women's suffrage, existing among the electorate of England. In other words, the House of Commons often fails to be, as it is sometimes expressed, the mirror of the national mind, or to exactly reflect the will of the electors. Second proposition. It is quite possible by some system of proportional representation to frame a House of Commons which would reflect much more than at present the opinion of the nation, or in other words, of the electorate. Third proposition. It is preeminently desirable that every opinion bona fide existing among the electors should be represented in the House of Commons in as nearly as possible the same proportion in which it exists among the electors, or, to use popular language, among the nation. Now, of these three propositions, the substantial truth of the first and second must, in my judgment, be admitted. No one can doubt the possibility, and even the high probability, that, for example, the cause of women's suffrage may, at the present moment, obtain more than half the votes of the House of Commons, while it would not obtain as many as half of the votes of the electorate. Nor, again, is it at all inconceivable that at some other period the cause of women's suffrage should, while receiving the support of half the electorate, fail to obtain the votes of half the House of Commons. No one in the second place can, I think, with reason dispute that, among the numerous plans for proportional representation thrust upon the attention of the public, someone, and probably several, would tend to make the House of Commons a more complete mirror of what is called the mind of the nation than the House is at present, and this concession, it may with advantage be noted, does not involve the belief that under any system of popular government whatever, a representative body can be created which at every moment will absolutely and with complete accuracy reflect the opinions held by various classes of the people of England. Now, my belief in the substantial truth of the first and second of our three propositions makes it needless for me, at any rate for the purpose of this introduction, to consider the reservations with which their absolute accuracy ought to be assumed. For the sake of argument, at any rate, I treat them as true. My essential objection to the system of proportional representation consists in my grave doubt as to the truth of the third of the above three propositions, namely, that it is desirable that any opinion existing among any large body of electors should be represented in the House of Commons as nearly as possible in the same proportion in which it exists among such electors. Before, however, any attempt is made to state the specific objections which in my judgment lie against the introduction of proportional representation into the Parliamentary Constitution of England, it is essential to discriminate between two different ideas which are confused together under the one demand for proportional representation. The one of these ideas is the desirability that every opinion entertained by a substantial body of Englishmen should obtain utterance in the House of Commons, or, to use a vulgar but effective piece of political slang, to be voiced by some member or members of that House. Thus, it has been laid down by the leader of the Liberal Party that, quote, it was infinitely to the advantage of the House of Commons, if it was to be a real reflection and mirror of the national mind, that there should be no strain of opinion honestly entertained by any substantial body of the King's subjects which should not find there representation and speech. End quote. To this doctrine, any person who has been influenced by the teaching of Locke, Bentham, and Mill will find it easy to assent, for it is well known that in any country, and especially in any country where popular government exists, the thoughts, even the bad or the foolish thoughts, of the people should be known to the national legislature. An extreme example will best show my meaning. If among the people of any land the hatred of the Jews or of Judaism should exist, it would certainly be desirable that this odious prejudice should find some exponent or advocate in the Parliament of such country, for the knowledge of popular errors or delusions may well be essential to the carrying out of just government or wise administration. Ignorance is never in truth the source of wisdom or of justice. The other idea or meaning attached by proportionalists to proportional representation is that every influential opinion should not only find utterance in the House of Commons, but further, and above all, be represented in the House of Commons by the same proportionate number of votes which it obtains from the voters at an election. Thus, the eminent man who advocated the desirability of every opinion obtaining a hearing in the House of Commons used on another occasion the following words: "It is an essential and integral feature of our policy that we shall go forward with the task of making the House of Commons not only the mouthpiece but the mirror of the national mind." Now, the doctrine of proportional representation, thus interpreted, is a dogma to which a fair-minded man may well refuse his assent. It is by no means obviously true. It is open to the following, among other objections, that admit of clear statement. Objections to the third proposition. First objection. The more complicated any system of popular election is made, the more power is thrown into the hands of the election agents or wire-pullers. This of itself increases the powers and lowers the character of the party machine, but the greatest political danger with which England is now threatened is the inordinate influence of party mechanism. This objection was long ago insisted upon by Budget. It explains, if it does not wholly justify, John Bright's denunciation of fancy franchises. Second objection. The House of Commons is no mere debating society. It is an assembly entrusted with great, though indirect, executive authority. It is, or ought to be, concerned with the appointment and the criticism of the Cabinet. Grant, for the sake of argument, that every influential opinion should in the House of Commons gain a hearing. This result would be obtained if two men, or only one man, were to be found in the House who could ensure a hearing whenever he spoke in favour of some peculiar opinion. The argument for woman suffrage was never stated with more force in Parliament than when John Mill represented Westminster. The reasons in its favour would not, as far as argument went, have commanded more attention if 100 members had been present who shared Mill's opinions, but were not endowed with his logical power and his lucidity of expression. But where a body of men such as constitute the House of Commons are at all concerned with government, unity of action is of more consequence than variety of opinion. The idea, indeed, of representation may be, and often is, carried much too far. A cabinet which represented all shades of opinion would be a ministry which could not act at all. No one really supposes that a government could in ordinary circumstances be formed in which two opposite parties balanced one another, nor can it often be desirable that an opinion held by, say, a third of a ministerial party should necessarily be represented by a third of the cabinet. It may well be doubted whether, even on commissions appointed partly at any rate for the purpose of inquiry, it is at all desirable that distinctly opposite views should obtain recognition. The commission which laid down the leading lines of poor law reform in 1834 rendered an immense service to England. Would there have been any real advantage in placing on that commission men who condemned any change in the existing poor law? Third objection. Proportional representation, just because it aims at the representation of opinions rather than of persons, tends to promote the existence in the House of Commons of numerous party groups and also fosters the admitted evil of log-rolling. The working of English parliamentary government has owed half of its success to the existence of two leading and opposed parties, and of two such parties only. Using somewhat antiquated but still intelligible terms, let me call them by the name of Tories and Whigs. These two parties have, if one may speak in very broad terms, tendered, the one to uphold the rule of the well-born, the well-to-do, and therefore on the whole of the more educated members of the community. The other has promoted the power of numbers, and has therefore aimed at increasing the political authority of the comparatively poor, that is, of the comparatively ignorant. Each tendency has obviously some good and some bad effects. If, for a moment, one may adopt modern expressions while divesting them of any implied blame or praise, one may say that conservatism and liberalism each play their part in promoting the welfare of any country where popular government exists. Now that the existence of two leading parties, and of two such parties only, in England has favoured the development of English constitutionalism is past denial. It is also certain that during the 19th century there has been a notable tendency in English public life to produce in the House of Commons separate groups or parties which stood more or less apart from Tories and Whigs, and were all but wholly devoted to the attainment of some one definite change or reform. The Repealers, as led by O'Connell, and still more the Free Traders, as led by Cobden, are early examples of such groups. These groups avowedly held the success of the cause for which they fought of greater consequence than the maintenance in office either of Tories or of Whigs. Even in 1845 they had perplexed the working of our Constitution. They had gone far to limit the operation of the very valuable rule that a party, which persuades Parliament to adopt the party's policy, should be prepared to take office and carry that policy into effect. The Free Traders, in fact, give the best, if not the earliest, example of an English group organised to enforce the adoption by the English Parliament of an opinion, doctrine, or theory to which that group was devoted. Now, an observer of the course of events during the last 60 years will at once note the increasing number of such groups in the House of Commons. Today we have ministerialists and unionists, corresponding roughly with the old Whigs and Tories. We have also Irish nationalists and the Labour Party. These parties have each separate organisations, but one can easily observe the existence of smaller bodies, each devoted to its own movement or cause, such for example as the temperance reformers, as the advocates of women's suffrage, or as the members who hold that the question of the day is the disestablishment of the Church. This state of things already invalidates our constitutional customs, nor is it easy to doubt that any fair system of proportional representation must increase the number of groups existing in Parliament, for the very object of proportionalists is to ensure that every opinion which exists among an appreciable number of British electors shall have an amount of votes in Parliament proportionate to the number of votes it obtains among the electors. If, for example, a tenth of the electors should be anti-vaccinators, the anti-vaccinators ought, under a perfect scheme of representation, to command 67 votes in the House of Commons. 67 anti-vaccinators who might accidentally obtain seats in the House of Commons, e.g. as Conservatives or Liberals, would, be it noted, constitute a very different body from 67 members sent to the House of Commons to represent the cause of anti-vaccination. The difference is this. In the first case, each anti-vaccinator would often perceive that there were matters of more pressing importance than anti-vaccination, but the 67 men elected under a system of proportional representation to obtain the total repeal of the vaccination laws would, one may almost say must, make that repeal the one dominant object of their parliamentary action. That the multiplication of groups might weaken the whole system of our parliamentary government is a probable conjecture. That proportional representation might tend to extend the vicious system of log-rolling is all but demonstrable. Let me suppose the 67 anti-vaccinators to be already in existence. Let me suppose, as would probably be the case, that they are elected because of their firm faith in anti-vaccination, and that, both from their position and from their creed, they feel that to destroy the vaccination laws is the supreme object at which every good man should aim. They will soon find that their 67 votes, though of high importance, are not enough to save the country. The course which these patriots must follow is obvious. They are comparatively indifferent about Home Rule, about disestablishment, about the objects of the Labour Party. Let them promise their support to each of the groups advocating each of these objects in return for the help in repealing legislation which originates, say our anti-vaccinators, in the delusions of Jenner. A political miracle will have been performed. A majority in favour of anti-vaccination will have been obtained. The voice of fanatics will have defeated the common sense of the nation. Let me, as an illustration of my contention, recall to public attention a forgotten fact. Some 40 years ago the claimant, now barely remembered as Arthur Orton, was a popular hero. His condemnation to imprisonment for 14 or 15 years excited much indignation. He obtained one representative, and one representative only, of his grievances in the House of Commons. Under a properly organised system of proportional representation, combined with our present household suffrage, he might well have obtained 20. Does anyone doubt that these 20 votes would have weighed with the whips of any party in power? Is it at all certain that the claimant might not, thus supported, have obtained a mitigation of his punishment, if not a retrial of his case. This is an extreme illustration of popular folly. For this very reason it is a good test of a logical theory. I do not contend that proportional representation cannot be defended by weighty considerations. My contention is that it is open to some grave objections which have not received an adequate answer.